Public transportation and equitable access to broadband can transform a city and offer more opportunity to its citizens. Joining me now is Jim Hovland, Mayor of Edina, Minnesota, who is the Vice Chair of the Transportation and Communications Committee over at the Conference of Mayors. Mayor Hovland, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you've been mayor since 2005. Quite a run there. Tell me how the job has changed.
That's a great question. I would say that over time, it's become more complex and more time-consumptive. And for many of us that serve as suburban mayors, you know, it's intended to be a part-time job, but it takes. I've got two full-time jobs, I guess I'll put it that way.
Okay.
One as a lawyer and one as a mayor of my city. Now, some of it's self-inflicted because I like to get involved in things in the region instead of just staying at home, you know, in Edina. So I'm active in the region, I'm active in the state, and I'm active on a national basis because I think this is all important and I hope makes me a better mayor.
Let's talk about transportation. How important is it for your community this finally got done? I'm sure you've been waiting and waiting and waiting for Congress to act. They finally have. What's the implementation? We've been talking to other mayors about that. You know, what is the implementation and how is it going and how long is it going to take?
Yeah, well, it's another really superb question, I think. And, you know, I think back to this pandemic and the period of COVID and what came out of it, that was a silver lining. And you start thinking about the commitment, I think, and a bipartisan commitment to make sure that we restore and advance our transportation infrastructure system and our broadband capabilities on a nationwide basis. There was a time when the United States more effectively and efficiently moved people and goods than any country in the world. Mm-hmm. And we don't do that anymore. And so we've got a lot of work to do, whether it's in the ports or it's on the rail systems, it's roads, bridges, transit. All of these things are critically important. And some of those funds that help our nationwide system operate efficiently and effectively come down to the local level where things are getting done there as well. So it might be a bridge in our town or a trail system for non-motorized movements. Money's dedicated that came down from the Federal Highway Trust Fund through the Minnesota Department of Transportation on to what we have. We have a regional governance body called the Metropolitan Council, where I also chair the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council, dealing with about $200 million in funding that comes down biannually from the Highway Trust Fund federally to be able to use in our region, just that metropolitan region. So now with the IIJA, it's now $300 million that we're dealing with annually. So that boost is really important to both preservation of the system and also expansion of the system to the extent it's necessary.
What was the effect of COVID? We're still in the pandemic, and especially because when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about mass transit and people not just driving their cars one off to work. You know, how has it been and where is it going?
That's another really good question.
I've got a great staff. They give me the questions.
Yeah, and I think across America we're seeing this. You know, there's this hybrid work situation. People aren't going to the office every day like they used to go to the office, and so as a consequence of that, we're seeing a bit less congestion on the freeway system. So where people were wondering, well, how are we going to expand this highway system of ours in the past? You don't hear people talking about that as much anymore. With transit, I think it's essential that what we restored is confidence, both from a public health and a public safety standpoint in using those public transportation systems. In other places in the world where it's more dense, you know, like Seoul, South Korea, 75–80% of the people use mass transit to go to work. On the East Coast, it's more prevalent. You know, there'd be a higher percentage of usage. But we're seeing in the Twin Cities, we're not seeing those numbers pre-COVID that we were seeing. We're not seeing numbers now that match up with what we had pre-COVID in terms of use of public transportation.
Okay. You had a program that you helped start that provided free internet to low-income residents. What did you learn from that? What was the impetus behind that?
I think the impetus was that when school districts decided that kids were going to go to remote learning, we wanted to make sure not only in our town but in our state, that kids had every opportunity to continue to try to learn on a remote basis. And I think that had so many significant challenges to it. But one of the things we didn't want kids to face was access to the internet at the speeds that were appropriate and at an affordable cost for the families. So we partnered with our school district and figured out where we needed to have additional service. And then we used some of our ARPA money, our ARPA money to set up this program with Comcast on their Internet Essentials program, which discounts the cost significantly for internet to families that can't otherwise afford to have internet in their household.
And what was it? Did you see the effect of it? I mean, was it a game changer?
I think our school district would say yes. That was very, very helpful in having that program put in place, and it was a significant monetary commitment, and it continues on.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, you're a leader on the Transportation and Communications Committee. Can you describe the communications? Because I think that's very important, because let's say when you pass a transportation bill, as Congress has done, then it's kind of very complicated. And you have to communicate, obviously, how do stakeholders access this information, RFPs, all those kind of acronyms that are kind of Washington-based. But what's the communication element of that?
The communications piece deals more with the broadband element of it, that technology piece. And there's a subcommittee chair for that, so I'm the vice chair over that entire umbrella of that Transportation Standing Committee on Transportation and Communications. And when the president promised he was going to have basically border-to-border, wall-to-wall internet for every American, I think that was the notion of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, led by our very effective staff and key mayors from around the country that helped build that capacity around broadband. And I think the former mayor of Chattanooga is helping lead that now for the administration to make sure that we've got adequate internet service at an affordable cost all throughout the country.
That's very important. When you're meeting with you come into Washington every year, and you've been doing it for years. What do you learn from other mayors?
On a variety of topics, and of course we face challenges that might vary from meeting to meeting. For instance, we just had a session this morning on dealing with hate and bias. And 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had a session like that, but we've seen a surge in that kind of activity.
When you're saying hate specifically, what are you talking
hate, bias and hate crimes.
Hate crimes, right.
Acts of hatred that might not rise to the level of a crime.
Okay.
Anti-Semitic behavior, anti-brown and black people behavior, literature, or actual hate crimes that the Justice Department tells us are being ill-defined. There's an underreporting on hate crimes across the country, and we're seeing an increase in it. And in fact, one of the mayors that was there this morning was from Munich, Germany. She said the two categories that they're seeing an increase in difficulty with are anti-Semitic activity, and then also hate crimes against elected female politicians. Female politicians.
Wow.
So that was
troubling.
That was troubling news. Very troubling news, and so it's global.
Okay, now the new Congress has started. We finally have a House Speaker. It's divided government for the first time in a bit. What do you want to see Congress do that would help your community? And the White House.
Yeah, and we've been used to divided government in Minnesota. We've got an alignment for the first time in several years, so you can still get things done. And you can find that common ground, just like President Biden did with Congress, with some of these things that he wanted bipartisan support on and was able to achieve. And I think we can continue to find that common ground on some of these issues around, I think, technology. We talked about equity, diversity, inclusion, hate crimes. The list goes on. Housing affordability is a huge issue globally, and we're going to have to face up to that and figure out how the federal government and state governments can help deal with some of those housing affordability challenges. So
that's interesting, because you don't hear a lot of politicians, at least in Washington, talking about that as far as passing legislation. I mean, I know some bits and pieces have passed before, but you'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, in fact, there's from a local standpoint in our state, and I think in every state, there's a clamoring by local elected officials to have their state governments make more of a financial commitment to the needs that we see in housing and the affordability of housing for all people, whether it's rent or owned. But we're not seeing that same level of commitment at the federal level. And I think that's something that we really need to be working on is having a better federal partner. And that seems to me to be something that should be agnostic from a political standpoint.
You'd think.
You'd think.
You'd think. Well, we've run out of time. Mayor Jim Hovland, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. All right.